Okay folks, I'm going to start off straight away by introducing you to perhaps the most important bit of writing that's ever been written in the English language. Culpeper's Herbal. Written by Nicholas Culpeper. Nicholas Culpeper, born in 1619, died in 1654. He didn't even reach his 40s, died at 35. Yet in his life, he was a magic man. He learned herbalism from a very early age. In the first 10 years of his life, he was educated by his grandmother and various people in the village he grew up, and he was fortunate enough to have an early rich marriage, so he was able to set up his own apothecary. And from this, he started treating people in the East End of London with herbs. And at the same time, he was introduced to William Lilly, who was perhaps the greatest medieval astrologer of all time. He wrote Christian astrology, still a fundamental basic of astrology today. And Culpeper became quite a well-known physician, and as his studies in astrology grew, so he incorporated his study of herbs and physics, and in the old sense of physics, not the current sense of physics, and he integrated the two. There was the interregnum then, around the time where King Charles I died and the Civil War started. And it was in 1640 that, at the start of the Civil War, Culpeper set up his first practice in East London and started treating people professionally using herbs and astrology. At the one hand, he really rebelled against his medical peers because they were limited to the teachings of Galen. They were limited to the old Latin scripts, and Culpeper went beyond, and he got results. And in 1643, in the Civil War, he was fighting strongly on the side of the Republicans. He was wounded quite badly at the Battle of Newbury, and in recuperation, he wrote his first works, basically the death of the White King in 1643, which along with William Lilly predicted the downfall of the king and the rise of the Republican movement in this country. Bearing in mind this is in one of the most convoluted periods of British history, the 1640s, right in the middle of the English Civil War. At the start of the English Civil War, you had perhaps 4 or 5 astrological almanacs in print, and by the end of it, 8 years later, you had something like 25,000. So during the Civil War, astrology became very big, and a number of astrologers were on both sides, and you would find in a number of battles that astrologers employed by both sides would ride up and down the lines, shouting their predictions of victory to the soldiers. It's just that Culpeper got it right more often than most. What he did, but his most contentious thing, is he wrote the progenitor of this book in 1649, and it was called A Directory of the Physic, or a Physical Directory. And what he did is he translated all the old Latin texts into English and published it off his own bat. And for the first time, modern man was able to read in English stuff around their own medicine. Prior to that, all the medical texts had only been in Latin, and they were only available to the College of Surgeons. So he gave common people the right to practice their own medicine, to practice their own health. And certainly, for nothing else, that strikes me as being one of the most important people in history, simply because he gave people the power over their own bodies. He didn't last much longer after than this. He died in 1653 of tuberculosis in his mid-30s. But that was common in those days. Not many people did live to be a ripe old age. But he left this behind. And this is still 2 out of 10, maybe 1 out of 10, 10% of the British public will have this on their bookshelf somewhere. Everyone's granny has got a copy. And I'd just like to read a couple of sentences from it. In the very back of the book, for any of you that have this book, go and have a look at the very, very last page. And it says, in the very, very last page, the very last paragraphs, it says, "The way of mixing medicines. This being the key of the work, I shall be particular. I shall address myself. Firstly, to the vulgar, and secondly, to those that study astrology. Then he gives details on how to work with astrology and all the various herbs and practices. And the thing is, it still works today. And I'm going to give you a number of examples of how what he initiated has given rise to a much more holistic and integrated approach, using astrology as a tool to define the ongoing holistic revolution. And without Culpeper, I truly believe that the ongoing holistic revolution could not have happened. So, if you haven't got it, get it. Okay, I mean, now that Culpeper's herbal shops are no longer so popular, this book may become harder to get hold of, especially under current new regulations coming in, because this gives perfect medicine for everything. It's worth looking at. Now, I'm really attracted to that period of history. I wouldn't call myself a Republican, but I like the fact that there was quite a period of concentrated revolution and that astrologers were at the heart of it. And astrologers have been at the heart of most political intrigue over the centuries, normally acting behind the scenes. For example, in this country, there has always been an astrologer royal, with the exception of a 70-year period around the late 1700s to the early 1800s. That's the only time there wasn't. And without saying too, I don't wish to get into promoting or defending astrology in any way, but I want to suggest perhaps that over the millennia, those people who have studied the heavens have gained an insight into both global and human politics that gives them a different way of seeing the world. And when they can communicate that in a way that everyone else understands, then this gives the wisdom. I'm fortunate enough to have studied astrology now for about 32 years. And I've been doing charts for about 30 of them, and it's been my only source of income for about 11 years now. And I was very fortunate to come to Bath to do the master's degree a few years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, that set me on my current path. Since that time, the number of readings I've done has developed exponentially. And even in my current files, I have readings of 15,000 clients that I have spoken to in the last 8 or 9 years. Add to this perhaps 5,000 readings, telephone readings when I used to work for the phone lines. These are readings I've got records of, and then I would guesstimate another 10,000 before that, before I started keeping records. So I'm guessing I've done somewhere around 35,000 readings in my life, of which I've got statistical breakdown and records of about 15 to 20,000. So I've got an immense database that I can draw on, and it's not like 20 or 100, it's thousands, tens of thousands. And because of the way I grew up and because of the way my life's been, I've always looked for alternatives, particularly when it comes to issues around consciousness and health. I've never trusted the idea of going to a doctor and getting a magical pill. It's never seemed right. Not just at a pure intuitive level, it's never felt right. And I was fortunate enough to have one of those grannies who always was telling me the old wives' tale about put this on your eye and it will stop it, or put an onion on your ear, or put cucumber on your eye. And the thing is, they work. And when I found out how they work, I believed in it full time. But I started noticing correlations. Now, I'm working with data that's been around hundreds of years. We could go back to Galen with the Greeks. There's all manner of medical astrology going back, at least to the 1500s or 1600s. But much of it involves leeches and things like this. So it's not really that contemporary. Over a period of the last couple of 100 years, as astrology's really regained itself, particularly in the last 70 or 80 years, it's become more and more accepted that certain planetary energies relate to certain physiological issues in the body. Now, here I'm on safe ground. Before I get into the contentious stuff, I'm going to set the framework of what I'm going to suggest. The framework is easy here because I can prove this. Let's start with the most obvious one. There's the planet out there called Saturn. Now, Saturn is the furthest planet that you can see with the naked eye. You can't see any further than that. And the ancient Arabs and Greeks and Minoans and Egyptians knew this. So straight away, its tenet was that of boundary. You can't go beyond it without becoming invisible. Saturn, when it's clear, you can see its rings, and it's about being held in, constricted and limited. And Saturn is made of cold gas. It's so far from the sun that the gas compacts into crystals of ice that give density and gravity. Hence Saturn's reputation for restriction, limitation and frustration, at least when young. It leads to structure, order and hard work as you get older. But Saturn works in cycles, 7-year and 29-year cycles. The 7-year itch Saturn is the originator of this. The key word for Saturn is structure. I see people with powerful Saturns going on to become architects or lawyers or barristers, building structure or legal structure, or working with bone structure, whether it's osteopathy or dentistry or massage. And Saturn works with bones. Once you're past 40 and you start getting arthritis and rheumatism, as many people do, Saturn is a strong indicator of bone stuff. Wherever you have bone issues, if you have a strong Saturn in your chart, your bone structure will be good. If you have a difficult Saturn, you're going to find that issues around teeth or arthritis and rheumatism or easy fractures will be more commonplace. Similarly, it's been known for millennia that the planet Mercury, because it goes around the sun so fast, its principle is that of movement and communication. It is the way we socialise and party in the world. It is the way we interact with other through text and email and telephone. And it is the way we think. It is our intellect and mind. It's all systems of communication. It's always been known that Mercury is the fast-winged messenger of the gods because it goes around the sun so fast. But in the last couple of 100 years, it's become more and more recognised astrologically that Mercury has a lot to do with the communication systems of the body. So when I see people with a difficult Mercury, I know that there's going to be either inhibition, shyness, reserve, or mental inconfidence, or, as commonly, these are the people with difficult Mercuries who will smoke tobacco because they need to feel that their throat is being constricted or tied. And it's all to do with the communication system. It's to do with the throat, the larynx, the upper chest and the lungs. I'm not really saying anything new here. This is generally well known. What I am going to suggest is a few additions to this. I could add to this, but if we say Saturn is the bones and Mercury is the communication, then it's well known that Mars is associated with bones and bumps and bangs and bruises and broken bones, and this is true. You see someone with a really strong Mars, they're going to get a lot of bumps and bangs. They're not going to get ill, but they'll get strong. They're not going to get ill, they'll get better fast, but they will have a lot of clumsy, impulsive actions about them. Good recuperation though, they get better fast, that's the good thing with Mars. This has been known since Roman times. This is where they got their archetypes from Greece, and Greece developed them from the Minoan, Egyptian, Babylonian culture. So it goes back a long, long time. Not so well known is the influences at the physiological of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. And it's been hypothetical for 20 or 30 or 40 years since it was first postulated, and it's now becoming accepted. So what I'm about to say is not so much brand new, it's still fairly contemporary. In the context of physiological well-being, health, physical wealth, when you find people who are going through a difficult Neptune transit, for example, Neptune, when he's in a good way, brings beautiful words like empathy and compassion, sensitivity and intuition, and your relationship with divinity, however you see it as being. But on the challenging side, it brings confusion and distortion and gullibility and sometimes escapism and often addiction. Whether that addiction is to drugs or alcohol or religious fundamentalism or any type of belief system that stops you having to think for yourself. Whilst Neptune does have a neurotic and nebulous effect on one's consciousness, and certainly under a difficult year-long Neptune transit, it is not a good time for long-term contracts. That is outside really what I'm trying to get across about it in a more physical way. Neptune is the coagulant. It is the stuff that clogs you up. It is the asthma. It is the congealing of the phlegm, the snotty stuff. Now, I should say at this point that what I'm getting into hypothesis now, and I have to say that what I'm about to say is because of my professional experience and as a result of my statistical analysis. There's no science to back it up. But I know that when I see people going through a difficult Neptune transit and I say to them, right, lactose free for a year or lactose free for a month, they will come back to me after a month and they're breathing clean. And they can have goats or sheep's milk, but not dairy, not cow juice, not cheese or butter, stuff with lactose in. Now I can't prove this, well I can statistically, but it's not just Neptune, it's a combination of other factors, but Neptune produces the snotty stuff, it's the viral, it's the toxin, it's the stuff you can't really understand or be clear about. So if you find people who have a difficult Neptune in their chart, encourage them to drink lots of water, because Neptune is the deep sea, it brings the water through. People with difficult Neptune are very intuitive, very sensitive, very receptive, so they need to live by the seaside. And if someone's going through a difficult Neptune transit, then just reassure them that they're going off planet for a year, but they'll be coming back and it's okay, and not to worry too much about it. There's nothing you can do about it apart from just let things dissolve. Sometimes Neptune does bring dissolution in a way that is permanent. For example, I've seen one of my clients from a few years ago now, had HIV and had it fine for about 8-9 years, and then Neptune hit their sun, and within 2 weeks they got pneumonia, and within 6 weeks they were dead. Now that's probably just coincidence, but the statistics don't tend to suggest that. Neptune does bring a dissolving and a releasing, and sometimes you just have to go with the flow, otherwise it gets nebulous and confusing, and then the neurosis sets in and it gets really messy. It doesn't just stick with the physical. Similarly, Pluto. Pluto is beginning to be seen less and less. The scientists have downgraded it from a planet, and they're welcome. The statistics back up the astrology that although Pluto is only the size of our moon, and it is 4 billion miles away, nevertheless the statistics show that when you find Pluto in a difficult way, you see cases of intensity and extreme and crisis and trauma and obsession and compulsion. But when it's in a good way, you see transformation and regeneration and caterpillar into butterfly and snake shedding skin, ultimately leading to the phoenix rising from the ashes. Physiologically, Pluto is most commonly associated with the recreational system, the procreative system, the genital system, and the excretory system. Because Pluto deals with the shit. He's at the very bottom. If you want to get in touch with Pluto, you've got to go to your deepest, darkest cave. Right? He represents the psychological, deep-rooted unconscious. And the only way you can go there is with feeling. You can't go there with thoughts. It's unconscious, so you can't think about it. Pluto expels, it deals, it detoxes, it purges, it eliminates. It's ruthless. In a negative way, it can be very manipulative, but in a favourable way, it can really purge and cleanse. Consequently, when you see someone with a difficult Pluto, you want to recommend them to sort of eat lots of things that really clean their system out. These are people who will regularly come up with zits or boils or expel poisons through their body in some way. Common. When I see people going through a difficult Pluto transit, I encourage them to have a regularly constant, physically active lifestyle and to sweat, to go clubbing, to dance, to do anything to bring sweat out of the body, because I believe that sweat is one of the best systems for detoxing, as far as I'm aware. Now, I'm getting on dodgy ground here because I don't have any medical training. I'm an astrologer. Nevertheless, the idea of purging oneself and eliminating and purifying oneself is very Plutonian. And it sometimes helps to see Pluto not so much as Pluto the Dark Destroyer, but more as Hades, the Lord of the Underworld, where you can get in touch with your more primal and basic urges. Uranus, which has been around, I mean, Pluto was only discovered, 80 years ago, so it's new. Uranus was discovered around 250 years ago. It's becoming recognised now. And it's pretty strongly associated that people with a strong Uranus in their chart, they're going to have a good constitution, but they're also going to have a rather erratic lifestyle. And particularly at the physiological level, Uranus seems to have increasingly strong correlations with the heart, with the heartbeat, with the electrical systems of the body, with the brain transfer, the electrical neurotic transfer of the brain, anything that involves electrical systems and regulatory rhythms seems to be the domain of Uranus. And often I find that people with strong Uranus aspects to their sun or their moon or their Mars or their ascendant, that as they get older, these are the people who become convinced that when they're not going to linger, but when it's time for them to leave, they're going to have a heart attack and bang, and it's going to be over really fast. And often that is true. Uranus is very fast, and it can sometimes be very fast indeed. It is where people can work with time. If you have a strong Uranus in your chart, you're going to be a bit of a precognitive. You're going to know when someone's about to say something or when something's about to happen. It's like you live in a different time zone to everyone else sometimes. You see, these archetypes have been developed over the last 20, 30, 40 years by a number of different astrologers, and they're now becoming mainstream astrology. And I want to now take it a bit further. I was fascinated when I really got into astrology and I really started developing my passion for it. It was around the mid-late 80s. And at this time, the first ephemerises were coming out for this new planet, and it was actually a planetoid, called Chiron, that was discovered in 1979. When I say ephemeris, I mean the book of planetary positions. This is an ephemeris. This is just a daily, this is just a 2012 one. I've got one for 100 years. And all it is a book of tables. It just shows where every planet is for every day of the year. It's like a bus timetable. Except that it's planets instead of buses. It's a bit bigger. And a bit more regular as well. When Chiron was discovered, the first thing that was noted was how the hell did it get its name? Well, because the guy who discovered it had a fixation with horses. So he called it Chiron because he always liked horses, he always liked riding horses, and his nickname was Chiron because Chiron is half man, half horse. He's the centaur. Okay? That's how it got its name. It's pure coincidence, allegedly. Synchronicity works wonderfully when planets get named. I may have time to tell you other stories on this. What was immediately recognised once its orbit was computed was that at its furthest most point, Chiron touched the innermost point of Uranus's orbit. and at its innermost point, it touched the furthestmost point of Saturn's orbit. What that means, in a nutshell, is that Uranus links the inner planets and the outer planets. All of a sudden, there's a bridge, a link between the planets you can see and the planets you can't. The visible, the invisible, the conscious, the unconscious. And over the next few years from Chiron's discovery, 79 through to 85, we see the start of a holistic revolution. We see the start and the emergence, although it's always been there, but we see the much more recognition of the more holistic therapies. Astrology starts to develop big time. People start talking more about acupuncture and homeopathy, and it starts. And it was synchronous with the discovery of Chiron. Now, Chiron was, when born of a mother who turned herself into a horse to run away from Zeus, who was seeking to impregnate her. It's all Greek mythology, and it's all quite sordid, and we're not going to go there. But he was born of an immortal father. He was immortal. He was rejected by his mother. So his father never knew him. Whenever you see a strong Chiron in people's charts, straight away you look for parent issues of abandonment. And that's a very big word. It's becoming more and more pertinent in today's society about how many people as individuals are actually feeling abandoned, whether it's by their parents or by their friends or by society. He eventually taught himself medicine and became a teacher of the gods. He taught Achilles, he taught Asclepius, the founder of modern medicine. He gave Achilles the homeopathic remedy to put on his arrows, and then Achilles let one loose by accident and it landed in Chiron's heel. But he was immortal, but he's fatally wounded. He couldn't die, but he's in permanent pain. So he spends centuries going around all the different cultures in the world, exploring all the different herbal cures to try and cure him of his pain. And he tries every medicine he finds everywhere in the world, and nothing can cure him. So at the end of the day, Zeus takes pity on him and throws him into the stars, and it becomes a constellation. But there's various additions to this myth. But it talks, the essence here is that of the more you seek outside for curing and healing, the less likely you are to find results. Chiron only found healing inside himself when he accepted his plight. He accepted the part of him that was fatally wounded, but that was immortal. He realised he could not die, so instead he gave up his life to the teaching of others. And here we see the myth of Chiron. Every single one of us has a shadow, and most of us spend a lifetime in trying to get rid of that shadow. And the more we try and get rid of it, the stronger it gets, until in time it consumes and absorbs us, and we become that very person we've been scared of being. Other people will turn around and go, right, I fought for years to try and get rid of this, and it's not going to go away, so I might as well just accept it. And they turn around to their shadow and they go, right, I'm not going to fight you anymore. I've got a nice little dungeon down there at the core of my being where you can fester away to your heart's content and even come out to play for a couple of hours every month. And the dark side will go, oh wow, I'm wanted, I'm part of a team, and it stops being 2% of the problem and starts becoming 0.01. And then you become much more integrated. Those people who try and negate their shadow are actually doing themselves a massive disservice, because they are, by refusing to acknowledge the side of themselves which is not as good as they would like, they are becoming steadily more dichotomized. Whereas those people who accept themselves as being who they are, warts and all, stand a much greater chance of becoming more integrated. Chiron is half man, half horse. He talks of the human intuition and the animal instinct bonding together. We live in a physical, three-dimensional body, subject to the pressures of everyday life and the illnesses of everyday life. We cannot just dream our way out into perfect health. We must look at the body as well. We are in a physical body. None of us are ever going to be good enough. As I say to a number of clients, 98% is good enough. If you had 100%, you'd have wings. So the mantra is not so much, I've got to get better, I've got to get better. The mantra is really, you're never going to be good enough, but you're always getting better. Every single day you're improving, and that is good enough. You're not being asked to be successful. You're being asked to do your best. That's all. Chiron, because of its connection with horses, I often find people with difficult chirons. First of all, I look at their relationship with both parents and issues of being abandoned, and then I normally ask a question which either makes them jump back and go, "Oh, how did you know that?" or burst into tears or something, or sometimes it's actually very favourable. I ask them how they get on with horses. Because horses seem to be increasingly a kind of shamanistic power totem animal for a number of people, especially those working with ideas of integration. And if they're okay with horses, then I talk to them about words like assimilation, holism, and integration. And if they're not okay with horses, then I talk to them about words like dichotomy, fragmentation, and disintegration. Okay? I talk to them about healing and wounding issues. The essence of Chiron, the wounded healer, permanently wounded but can't die, is that you can never heal anybody else. What you can do is you can empower others and catalyse others into healing themselves. You can't do it for them, otherwise you just become their fix. They become addicted to you. But you can empower them to do it for themselves, and that's the real secret lesson of Chiron. The linking of the unconscious with the conscious, the linking with the visible and the invisible, the merging. Now, it's when I started seeing how Chiron created the solar system, instead of being two separate segments, into one with a bridge linking the two, I started to see it as more as a unified whole. This was in the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s. What happened then, to change things even further, is that at the end of the 1980s, start of the 1990s, I picked up on it in about 1993. A woman in America called Demetra George brought out a book of ephemerises for the major asteroids, and she noted that they'd all been called after goddesses. So the book is called Asteroid Goddesses. And in it, she puts down that she was a nurse for 35 years, and astrology was her hobby. And she just noted through looking at, because her husband was working for NASA, he had access to all the relevant information to find out where the asteroids were at any given time, and she just noted correlations and postulated a few ideas, which acted as the originator for what I'm about to suggest. I looked at her work, and she listed 4 major asteroids and about 12 minor ones, which I worked through with my client base, and I ditched most of them, and I only stuck with the ones I'm sure of. Now, this is contentious, but this is about health and well-being issues that are increasingly affecting society. I'm looking primarily in terms of the major asteroids at the asteroids Ceres and Vesta. These are the 2 biggest asteroids in the asteroid belt. Now, Ceres, named by it was discovered in the 1600 it was discovered, yes. It's related to the Greek goddess of the grain, but the Romans had the goddess Ceres as their name, and that's how it became known, the asteroid. And Ceres gives us cereals. It's grain, okay? Ceres is about nurturing, whether it's through food, or warmth, or shelter, or clothes, or just hugs and cuddles. It's the ability to nurture oneself, to nurture others, and to allow others to nurture you. That's a big one for a lot of people. A lot of people are good at giving, but they're not very good at receiving. I have found in 35, 40% of cases that where I find Ceres in someone's horoscope strongly, and I mean strongly like 1%, but I've still got a good 100 or 2 of them, opposite someone's sun or moon, or conjunct someone's sun or moon, I am going to find issues to do with, at the very least, processed wheat, probably most grains, if not gluten. Now I'm going to get into trouble if any of you are doctors, but that's what I'm finding. And I say to them, okay, go for full moon to full moon, wheat free, and see how your digestion changes. And see how easier it is for you to process food. And quite a few of them do it, and some of them come back and say, yes, it worked. I've never had anyone complain about it. Now, why this should be, I'll come to in a moment. Similarly, Vesta. Everyone thinks of Vesta as in the Vestal Virgin, the goddess of the temple, but Vesta is, the origin of Vesta comes from the Greek Hestia, and she was the goddess of the flame. She kept the flame at the centre of the hearth. She kept the eternal flame going, and she always brought things into focus, into the centre. Now, why this should be, I don't know. But I find increasingly that when I find people with Vesta in difficult aspect to the sun, moon, ascendant, I find people with acute nervous disorders, which often leads to various forms of digestive disorder. Very contentious subject, but I'm finding it in, this one is about 15 to 20% of cases. Much more than 7 or 8 times the statistical average. So there's definitely something here about the issues of worry, nerves, beating oneself up, digestion, and the correlation with this lump of potato-shaped rock 2 billion miles away. Okay? I'll come back to how this is possible in a minute. That's nothing. At least you can see this. Ceres is about a quarter the size of our moon. Vesta is about 1/5 the size of our moon. You can see them with telescopes and they're basically round. They are planet-sized. Some of the small ones, some of the small asteroids, these are lumps of rock 100 miles wide at the most. At the most. And yet, and the names, they were given random names when they were discovered. But the names work. Why? I'll come to this. I've chosen 3 because these are the 3 I've had the most success with. There's an asteroid out there called Eros. Okay? Eros. What turns you on? What actually makes you feel good? I've got Eros in my chart exactly on my Mercury on my midheaven. I love words. I love talking. I'm a wordsmith. Other people who have Eros on their Mars are in love with taking risks or making danger. It's about what turns you on, and I find it unnervingly accurate. But even more accurate are the other 2. Icarus. It does what it says on the tin. If you've got Icarus on your Mars or opposite your Sun, you are the type of person who will go parachuting and free falling and doing stupid things. Yeah? And Lilith. Now Lilith, Adam kicked her out of Eden because she wouldn't lay down or whatever. Lilith, the asteroid Lilith, how can a lump of rock 80 miles wide, it's not even quite round, with a goddess's name, have such a strong effect? Nevertheless, whenever I see Lilith in strong aspect to someone's chart, to a particular point in someone's chart, the negative side of this is raw anger and violence, and the positive side of this is conflict resolution. I don't work with fate, I work with free will. The horoscope is a blueprint of potential. It doesn't tell you what can happen, it doesn't tell you what will, it tells you what can. You retain free will. So, having started off with solid ground, with Saturn ruling bones and Mercury ruling the throat, and then postulating a little bit with the outer planets, with Pluto ruling the psychological and the poisons, and Neptune ruling the nebulous and the phlegm and the coughing stuff. Okay, that's still fairly safe. Then I got into Ceres about wheat and Vesta with nerves and digestive issues. And I thought, okay, when I got into this, I thought, this is getting weird. How can this be? Then I looked at the minor asteroids and I thought, how can this be? How can this... I one of my papers for my master's degree was on statistics. And I know statistical ratios fairly well. I know that an average on something like this is going to be 3 or 4%. So when I'm getting a minimum of 20%, and in some cases 40%, 10 times, more than 10 times what I should be getting in terms of being able to have a look at a person's chart and have a guesstimate as to the state of their physical health to a better quality of degree than I should be able to by a factor of 10, I start thinking, okay, what is this? Now, it'd be so easy to say it's because I'm psychic or intuitive and because I've got gifts, and that's basically rubbish. I do what I do for a mixture of geometry, mathematics, pattern recognition, and intuition, admittedly. But I make no claim to be psychic. So I thought to myself, okay, how does this work? I can explain how the moon affects us. We're made of water. And you can hear Jupiter pulsing on the shortwave radio. Okay, so you can understand, all right, there's radio waves coming out of Jupiter and they're hitting us. So there's going to be some type of homeopathic effect. Right, I understand that. Got that. How does Pluto affect us? 4 billion miles away, size of our moon. But it does. The asteroids. You need a really big telescope to see this. How can little lumps of rock out there have such a dynamic and measurable effect on the well-being of so many people? Is it that I am attracting these people? It may be that I, as the observer, am attracting this type of energy. I have considered this, but it's not. So, you have to go back to basics and question the nature of reality. As a good friend of mine, Serena Roney-Dougal, pointed out to me not so long back, we only use 23% of our brain when we're awake and 27% when we're asleep. And the bits we use when we're asleep aren't all the same, the bits we use when we're awake. What's the rest up to? That's what I want to know. What's my brain doing when I'm not using it? And what's the 2/3 to 3/4 of it that is cut off from me and occluded actually up to? I've studied patterns for decades. A few of you may know that my dissertation for my master's degree was in crop circle studies. I'm an academic authority as far as crop circles go in this country, and I studied them because of the patterns. And working with all this stuff, it's put me quite out there on the edge, but it's led me to one or two inescapable conclusions, that the version of reality which we are presented with on a day-by-day level is not the totality of what there is. That what we're seeing and experiencing is very much through a filtered lens, in order to be able to maintain a degree of cohesive structure and relative sanity with the world. And that's always been the way it's been. However, when I was born, there was 2.2, 2.3 billion people on the planet, and now there's 7. It's tripled since I was born. And the acceleration of population in the last 50 years is only perhaps matched by the equally strong acceleration of both technology and spirituality. And if all of these things are put together and projected forward, what we are not seeing is a straight line graph. What we are seeing is a long, slow build to all of a sudden an escalating graph, and where we are now approaching prime vertical. If you need proof of this, ask yourself 15 years ago, did you have a mobile phone? Had you heard of the internet? And now look what we're doing. Look how far we come just in 15 years. Look how many people are being born. Look how many different types of philosophy, religion, spirituality we have evolving in the world around us now. Now, I've come up with a term of my own for this over the last year or so. I'm talking more and more about the consciousness revolution. And what I think is happening is that because of the compression of people on planet, that the idea of our own individual psychic space is now becoming more and more compressed, resulting in us having to change consciousness. If you look at this at something like a bacterial level, if you invade a host bacteria with a virus, that virus will multiply and multiply over the surface of the host until in time it consumes the entire surface of the host, and then both the host and the virus will die, or the host mutates from single-celled organisms into multi-celled organisms requiring far less food and far less space to live. I'm not suggesting that we as humanity are going to do that, but I am suggesting that there is some type of shift happening in the way we experience and see the world, that we're beginning to see the whole patterns of life being much more synchronistic and even serendipitous than we previously dared to believe. And that, I'm not telling you that everything you've seen so far is wrong. I wouldn't say that. But I do feel that we are now in a position to be able to take a leap forward in consciousness, which our ancestors have probably dreamt about around their campfires for thousands and thousands of years, that we've never had this time in our history that we have now. And I kind of feel that we've got a kind of responsibility to take the chances to move forward in consciousness, and especially those people that are working with the more holistic paradigm, working with the greater essence of holism and seeing everything as interconnected and interrelated. Because these are the people who are probably one step ahead of everyone else. I don't want to sound classist here, but there does seem to be a greater sense of unity being drawn in. Now, the beauty of me being an astrologer is that I can see the patterns forming both now and in the coming time. And as I've said on a number of occasions, the time of perhaps the late 1980s through to about 2015, 2016 is the most intense time of astrological pressure that there's been in our history. That there's not been a time this intense, astrologically speaking, since about 10,600 BC, about 12,500 years ago. And that this period of pressure we're under does reach a kind of plateau. Doesn't stop, but it plateaus around about 2015, 2016. So I'm firmly of the opinion that by the time we're into the end of this decade, by 2017, 2018, many of the situations that we're going through in the world at the moment will have been resolved. Now, I would care to postulate a little bit on this, both in terms of the more holistic environment and health attitudes. It does seem increasingly that we live on a knife edge at a day-by-day level. And it wouldn't take much to tip the balance. In the event that that would happen, the first thing that would go down would not be the food chain or the petrol chain or anything like that. It would be the drug supply. Most drugs chemical drugs I'm talking about, prescriptive medicines, are airlifted into Britain on a 24-hour basis. Okay, most of them come from Central Europe, Switzerland, Germany, where they're made, and they bring them in by plane every day for what the orders are. And if that were to suddenly stop, a lot of people would have a great deal of problems. Great deal. I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen. But I am suggesting increasingly that over the coming few years, we're going to see, in the short term, increasingly difficult challenges to the nature of our society, which is going to result in individuals having to take more responsibility for their own lives, both in terms of what they create and produce, what they consume and use, and how they look after themselves as well. Remember, we're very fortunate to live in this country. We have a national health service. No other country in the world has that. We are very privileged. It seems to me that the world's unravelling at the moment. All the corporations, all the big political parties, everything seems to be falling apart. Maybe it's just me and my sort of semi-crazy wish for it all to happen, because I'm just sick of all the corruption and lies that have been going on. The thing is, I know I'm not alone. I know that out there's a lot of people who are just so sick of the way the world's been, and they're all reaching for something better. And they know that it's there, they can dimly sense it somewhere in the near future in their consciousness. And it's like they've just got to cut a laser through this wall of fog. And that fog is generated, I suspect, by a combination of, I don't know, media hype, processed food, silly attitudes around well-being and things like this. I don't think the current lifestyle that we've been able to live in the last 20 or 30 years is any more sustainable. I really don't. When I look at the environmental shifts that are coming over the coming few years, I mean, some of it's really beautiful, make no mistake. What we're seeing in Israel and Nigeria with the desalination plants, where they're turning seawater into pure water and then just irrigating the deserts with it, that's wonderful. We're seeing countries renting desert space off of Algeria and Morocco to build massive solar farms and then going to microwave it down to us. We're seeing the idea of huge liners in the future being powered by massive kites. This is the way to get sea travel going. And the electrical car will be here very shortly now. It already is. 2 or 3, certainly 6 or 7 years. You want to go anywhere, you'll dial up and a little pod will turn up at your door and you'll get in and you'll punch in the postcode and off you go. And that'll be it. You just sit back and do nothing. It will happen like that with anti-crash technology, satellite driving. I don't think humanity's heading for an extinction event, but I do feel that humanity is diversifying and that there is a consciousness revolution going on, and that regardless of colour, age, religion, gender, it's about those who want a better world and are actually actively doing something about it, as opposed to those who are blaming or looking for results from hoping that someone else is going to do it for them. The world is increasingly turning into sheep and non-sheep, and I do feel that over the coming few years, those individuals who take responsibility for their health and well-being, and perhaps the biggest single key to health that I find from my limited knowledge is that of good nutrition, good diet. I'm grateful to Karen, my partner, because she's taught me a lot on this, but it seems that the better you eat, the better food you eat, the better health you have. It's not rocket science. It seems to me, here we are at 2012, the year that everyone's been waiting for. That's hype and spin, forget it, right? The actual crunch time's already gone. It was 2010, okay? We can't change the past now. We're rock and rolling into the future. It seems to me that perhaps the future is in the imagination. Perhaps the future is in expanding our consciousness. What do I mean by expanding our consciousness? I mean by becoming more empathic, compassionate, intuitive, and sensitive to everyone and everything around us, through being kinder, but without releasing our boundaries. And what I suspect will happen is that instead of using 22 or 23% of our brains, we'll use 24 or 25 or 26. And it'll be a little bit of improvement all the time, until in the end of the day, what you'll have, and what I believe we're already seeing now, is situations where someone can't come into a room such as this, for example, harbouring ill intent or carrying a weapon, without everyone going, something not right there, and we just know intuitively. I suggest that the more intuitive side of our mind is becoming less restricted by the logical faculties, and it's about blooming time. The mind's been really good at controlling our destiny for the last 2,000 years, when there's been very few of us and we needed to be logical to survive. But now there's so many of us, we can afford to embrace the creative and the spiritual more, or as much as the logical. So I anticipate over the coming few years an increase in the rate of challenge in the world and the ongoing difficulties we're going through. But I don't see it as either permanent or long-term. And I would like to hypothesize that by the time we're into the end of 2017, possibly the end of 2018, we're then going to be able to safely make long-term plans for the future in a way that should be sustainable. Now I hope this is going to be with the best of environmental and the best of spiritual attitudes in its place, because the alternative is unpalatable. It'll be, we'll end up in a kind of cyborg culture, where the environment will degrade, and then we're in real trouble. It seems to me that we chose to be born. I don't do reincarnation because it don't quite work for me. There's too many people alive now for reincarnation to work like the way that the Buddhists say it does. Although Buddhism is the only religion that astrology has anything in common with, because its tenet is know thyself. Nevertheless, it does seem that at this time there's a large number of people kind of waking up to why they volunteered to come down here in the first place, and to realising what their mission is and what they're supposed to be doing. And it's not about watching TV and getting the job and all that. It's about changing consciousness and shaping the planet and changing the planet. Because I genuinely believe, as a committed environmentalist above anything else, that if the planet is quite capable of living without us, thank you very much. But we're not capable of living without the planet. So this consciousness shift, I think, is the last hope we've got. If this had been 30 years ago, I'd be saying, no, let's rise up against the factories and stop it before it's too late. I think the consciousness shift is the last hope we have. So it's a long way from the consciousness shift that I'm postulating over the coming few years from this. But this was the start of it, because he taught us about how to integrate our bodies, our minds and our bodies together through the use of herbs and astrology. He gave us the use of medicine over ourselves. And now we've got the world at our feet. I'm going to leave it there and just say I hope you enjoyed listening. I hope that was informative, and I'll leave it there. But if anyone's got any questions, I'd love to, or comments, I'd love to chat just for 5 or 10 minutes.